law enforcement is too lenient. We have a lot of crime and a lot of disrespect nowadays because people have been trained that there are no consequences for their action. And it starts in the home. When people stopped spanking their children, they started behaving badly. The Bible talks about how, our fathers, our earthly fathers, disciplined us, and it says, why not? If we honored and respected them, why not listen to the Father of spirits and live? That is to God, because God also chastens us, and it says that we are trained by that chastening, by that discipline, to yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Well, we don't see too much of the peaceful fruit of righteousness nowadays, and it's because people have been allowed to just go on sinning with no consequences at all. Criminals, in particular, the worst among us, they know what they can get away with. They know what they can do. And it seems like the worse they are, the more lenient we are with them. It's like, oh, we don't want to ruin his whole life. Well, maybe he just killed or raped somebody. Ruin his life. Put him away so that nobody else can be hurt by him. Now, this is something that affected my life personally because when I was a teenager, I got picked up for serial murder. Can you believe that? I mean, here I am, an 18-year-old college student who was selling waterless cookware door to door. I'm not kidding. And, I kind of looked like Richie Cunningham back in those days. And 6 cars came to get me because, unbeknownst to me, there was an unsolved murder in the area. And you know why they came after me? Because it was easy to. It was easy to come and slap the cuffs on me, drag me downtown, and intimidate me because they knew I was going to be compliant. I when they said, "Do I have to read your rights?" I said, "No, sir." And I told them anything they wanted to know. And after a while, I mean, they wouldn't even tell me what I was down there for. But there were unsolved murders in the neighborhood. But who do they get? They come and got me. Not the guy who just been let out a couple months earlier for doing the exact same stuff. No, no, they thought it was possibly this 18-year-old white kid, not the 6'2" snaggletooth black man with a long history of violence. No, they came after me because it's easy to come after me. I would comply. But once they realized, and I did comply, I didn't give them a hard time at all. And that's because I had been disciplined from an early age to respect people in authority, even when they're wrong. um, and that is something that is lost on us. And because I was compliant, I walked out of there. I didn't get beaten up. I was severely inconvenienced, and they did scare me somewhat. But I knew I didn't do whatever it was they were talking about. I was basically just out doing my job, and some nervous person called up thinking I was a serial killer. So if it could happen to me, I guess it could happen to anyone. But anyway, the man that they picked up had actually committed a murder the year I was born, 1958. But, okay, this is a 16-year-old black youth, okay, in 1958. Supposedly that's a really bad time for black people, all right? But this was in Amsterdam, New York. It was upstate New York. And because the prosecutor was too hasty getting a confession from him, they ended up letting this kid go, even though he did it. And years later, he admitted that he had done it. In 1959, he beat a woman nearly to death, but this time there was a witness right there to see it, and the victim had, excuse me, had survived. And they sentenced him to 20 years. He did less than 10. And they let him out in 1968. And, he beat and raped somebody else. I think he murdered someone else. And 4 years later. Or no, it was I think it was less than 10 years later. They let him out, and he committed another violent crime. This time, only 4 years after beating and raping some woman. So they had been giving him chance after chance after chance, and then finally, in 1976, they let him out, and a couple months later, he committed some brutal murders in the Colony and Schenectady area. And that was the one they picked me up for. This incredibly brutal crime that matched other brutal crimes did by a guy that they kept letting out. And we have heard these stories. We know about that Irina Zarutska, that young Ukrainian woman who was murdered by a guy who had committed 14 felonies. They kept letting this guy out again and again. And it is bad for the rest of us. We're also concerned about the rights of a criminal because we are trying so hard to do right by these people, but we do wrong by everyone else. We make the world less safe for everyone else because we are not willing to execute judgment. And, we have the exact same problem with the Father of Spirits, with God. People do not believe there are consequences for their actions. They will not listen. They do not care. Even though Jesus came and took our sin, he took the punishment for our sin. He was brutally murdered, and he was an innocent man. But God said that if you'll put your trust in him, if you'll accept that as the sacrifice for your sin, then you can start over again. You can become a child of God. And he didn't send Jesus so that we could live violent criminal lives. It was so we could change our lives. That's why he gives the Holy Spirit to come into us to transform us. But out in the world, we are not being trained to yield the peaceful fruit of righteousness. We let people go, get worse and worse and worse. It's like all these peaceful protesters are not so peaceful. And law enforcement officers are constantly frustrated because they're not being allowed to do their job. And sometimes those guys have had enough. And I have to admit, I don't blame them. It's because law enforcement and the system has been so lenient on people that no one thinks they have consequences for their actions. Well, this is Don reminding you that one day there will be consequences for your actions. You have a good day.